because of his important contribution to the last publication that we did on this matter by Roderick Crawford, and he did a most helpful forward and part of the longevity of his interest in the subject, his analysis, and the importance of providing evidence-based chronologies and analyses is a central part of our educational mission here. The quantity and quality of the audience here today is also a testament to the importance of the message which he's imparting today, and also we're delighted to be able to welcome Right Honourable Arlene Foster, former First Minister of Northern Ireland, to deliver a vote of thanks. He's also very kindly agreed to answer questions, and usual House rule, no question too outrageous. You just simply have to state your name and organisation first. So without further ado, over to you, David. Delighted to have you on board here at Policy Exchange. Very much look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thanks. Thanks, Dean. It's a huge pleasure to be here and to be making my first speech as a new senior fellow, as you say, here at Policy Exchange, and I'm very much looking forward to working with you and colleagues. And thank you to Arlene Foster, former First Minister of Northern Ireland. Very pleased and honoured that she's taken time out to be here today, and looking forward to hearing what she has to say at the end as well. Ladies and gentlemen, the Northern Ireland Protocol is back. It was already an unavoidable part of the context for next week's Stormont elections, but on top of that came last week's seeming leak of what may or may not be the government's plans to bring forward legislation on the protocol in the new parliamentary session. Of course, the events in Ukraine, the PM's own tribulations, and so on, mean, as so often, that Northern Irish issues come well down the news agenda. Maybe that will change after the 5th of May, but in any case, this issue is not going away. I was the government's Brexit negotiator in 2019 when the current protocol was agreed, again in 2020 when it and the UK Internal Market Bill were part of the backdrop to the trade negotiations we were doing, and in 2021 I was the responsible minister as the protocol settlement, much earlier than we expected and in ways we had not foreseen, started to come apart. So with that experience behind me, as I look at the current debates, I see two things. First of all, I note that much recent debate about Brexit is really about the pros and cons of the protocol. In a way, that's a good thing. It reflects the relative lack of other things to talk about. Occasionally, another issue like fishing or touring performers gets a look in, but generally, it's actually quite remarkable how smoothly the total reordering of this country's external economic relations has gone. Unfortunately, the resulting attention, resulting concentration on the protocol is rather simplistic and pays little regard to the very unusual circumstances in which it was created. Second preliminary comment, with that in mind, it seems to me the protocol has become a symbol of different things to different people. For some in unionism, it's a symbol of betrayal by HMG again. Many nationalists see it, whether they admit it or not, as a step on the path to a border poll and a united Ireland. For Remainers and many in the EU, it's a symbol of the UK's supposed failure to understand what was possible and what it had signed up for. Equally, for some Brexiteers, it symbolises the EU's own carelessness in insisting on arrangements that prioritise the single market over sustaining the fragile politics in Northern Ireland. While for other Brexiteers, there's a frustration with the government, once again, that it pushed through Parliament a deal which was less than perfect as regards sovereignty and didn't deliver absolutely everything that was wanted. There's some truth, obviously, in all these judgments, but I think more in some than others, and certainly none is a complete picture. Yet it seems impossible for those who represent those different perspectives to engage with each other, and as a result, the discourse about the protocol has become a little bit disconnected from reality. So that's why I think and I thought that now is the right time to speak on the way forward. And as I speak today, I want to do three things. And I underline, obviously, I'm not in the government, I don't speak for the government, Some of the commentary out there on social media suggests that I might be. I'm not a member of the government. I'm giving my own perspective. So first, I want to recall what actually happened in 2019 and how we got to the current protocol. Second, explain how it started to go wrong. And third, and finally, comment on what needs to happen now. So first then, how did we get this protocol? So the negotiations I conducted in autumn 2019, already seem to have disappeared from political memory, possibly because the whole period was so traumatic to the British body politic that many people have just kind of blanked it and moved on. Maybe that's why so many people are accusing the government, and indeed me personally, either of not understanding the implications of the protocol or of signing it without intending to observe it. Obviously, neither is true, and let me explain why. Step back to the moment the Boris Johnson government entered office in July 2019. We were faced with a withdrawal agreement that had been agreed but could not get through Parliament. There was lots wrong with it, in our view, notably the continued role for the EU's Court of Justice, but the worst aspect was that first version of the Northern Ireland Protocol. Via the so-called backstop, its effect was to keep all of the UK in the EU's customs union until a different way of managing the Northern Ireland border had been found, even though the EU had said there was no other way of managing it. There will be alignment of the whole of the UK to the single market for goods and much else beside. And yet, despite all this, the concept of an Irish sea border still remained in the agreement. Northern Ireland was removed from the UK customs territory for WTO purposes, and then Great Britain and the EU plus Northern Ireland were put back together into a customs union. It was the worst of all worlds. Beyond that, we faced an agreed political declaration which committed the country to a high alignment soft Brexit in the future relationship negotiations that would follow. So in considering how to proceed on this basis, we faced serious dilemmas, many factors that needed to be balanced, and they explain why the final deal inevitably was imperfect. First of all, we had to deal with the growing belief amongst the political class and the wider public that the referendum results simply couldn't be delivered. Second, we were facing the shredding of our constitutional norms, with Parliament effectively taking on the role of the executive for Brexit purposes and hamstringing the government's ability to negotiate. Third, it was clear that a substantial proportion of the political class across the parties wanted to find a way of reversing the referendum result, which would have had, in our view, a devastating impact on faith in democracy itself. And I think few British governments entering into office have faced quite such a daunting prospect in such difficult circumstances. So we had to cut through this somehow. We had to get an agreement that could get through Parliament. And it is worth remembering that many, perhaps most observers, thought that that task was simply impossible. So we had to set priorities for the 3 months we had, and we had to be ruthless in doing so. We decided we had to prioritise. First, delivering the referendum result, leaving the EU by any means necessary on the set date, which at the time was 31st of October 2019. Second, leaving in a way which imposed minimal constraints on the future, leaving in a way which did not leave us irrevocably subject to EU laws and which did not pre-commit us to a particular form of Brexit. In other words, we wanted to give the country as much free choice, free optionality as possible in the FTA negotiations that would follow, and make that negotiation as far as possible one between equals. So that meant, for political and legal reasons, our priority had to be renegotiating the backstop, taking the whole country out of the EU customs union and redoing the political declaration. Given more time, we would certainly have tried to do more. We would like to do more, notably on limiting the role of the Court of Justice or removing the requirement to have a so-called independent monitoring body to mark our own homework on citizens' rights, but none of this was possible in the very short time we had available. As Martin Howe QC correctly pointed out in his October 2019 article summarising the pros and cons of our deal, and I quote, "It's much more difficult to try to renegotiate an existing text than it would have been to get the right result at the more fluid stages of original negotiation." In doing this, we had to ensure that the new arrangements for Northern Ireland reflected the balance of interests and concerns embodied in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement in all three strands. This was our overriding goal in this area. We always knew this would require some special arrangements covering Northern Ireland. We never contemplated any sort of checks or processes taking place at the land border. But we also knew unionist concerns had to be recognised and the fundamental unity of the UK's single market and customs territory had to be respected. So the summer progressed and the situation deteriorated further. The parliamentary background limited our options. By early September, the Ben Burt so-called Surrender Act was in place, the practical effect of which was to make it impossible to leave the EU without a deal of some kind. So by removing the walk-away option, this massively weakened our negotiating stand. And we could see from the EU's behaviour that they knew it. So trade-offs against this background were inevitable. It was simply not possible to get everything we wanted. That's why, after much back and forth, including with the DUP, we put forward the proposal we did in early October. And that proposal was that to minimise friction, and given pre-existing arrangements, we were ready to agree that Northern Ireland would have to align with EU SPS rules and EU manufactured goods rules. We recognised that these arrangements would entail some processes in the Irish Sea, but we believe that most could be done behind the border. We were not, however, prepared to put Northern Ireland into a different customs zone to that of the rest of the UK, and here we said that different arrangements involving electronic and other processes behind the border would have to be found. The crucial new element in all this was consent. We believe the only way it could be acceptable for any part of the UK to be subject to EU legislation and its institutions without a say was if there was periodic consent by the Northern Ireland people through their democratic institutions. And crucially, in our view, this had to involve a vote to go into the arrangements in the first place, as well as afterwards. So this offer, the offer of early October, was supported by virtually all Conservatives. The DUP describes it, and I quote, as a serious and sensible way forward. And in the 15 days that followed, what happened? It became clear that the EU would look to Ireland to judge whether the consent arrangements were workable and acceptable, and Ireland would look to the EU Commission to judge the rest. We unlocked the consent arrangements at the famous Wirral meeting with the Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, on 10th October. It was clear Ireland wanted to see a deal. Unfortunately, I think ceding to EU pressure at that point, Ireland would not agree to a consent vote in Northern Ireland to go into the proposed arrangements. If it had, I think the EU would have had to go along with that, and we would not have had the same difficulties we have now because consent by Northern Ireland would have been much more soundly based. However, the real problems came in Brussels. It was clear that the Commission doubted we had the political backing to get a deal through. They could see we could not walk away following the Surrender Act. They could see we had a deadline by which we had to reach a deal, 17th October, a week after the Wirral meeting. 17th October being the last day, which allowed time to complete parliamentary processes before 31st of October. In my opinion, actually, the EU were hoping that political developments would see Brexit reversed, particularly after the Supreme Court's prorogation ruling. And as a result, they turned the screws. In that week, talks happened when and in the configuration the EU wanted. My negotiating team was treated pretty brutally as the sort of supplicant representatives of a renegade province, culminating in us being actually shut in the meeting room in the Parlement until 2 a.m. on the final night of the talks, while the Commission debated whether they were ready to sign off on the agreement or not. We put up with all this treatment because we wanted to get things done. We thought it was the right thing to do. Substantively, in that week, the EU insisted on applying the EU's customs rules, the only redeeming feature being the provisions there should be no tariffs on goods not, quote, at risk of going into the Republic of Ireland. And the details of that were to be worked out later. We were able to agree some new provisions in the protocol, notably to guarantee Northern Ireland's status in the UK customs territory, a crucial difference from the earlier version. We could do nothing in these circumstances about the insistence that EU customs rules should nevertheless apply. That aspect, EU customs rules, that was the straw that broke the back of DUP engagement with this process. The DUP withdrew their support and we faced a very difficult decision, not least because we, as it turned out correctly, also had huge doubts about the workability and the political implications of the customs arrangements. So we faced a choice: take this deal and try and get it through Parliament and sort out the detail in 2020 while we were negotiating the trade agreement. And it bears repeating, I think, that no one knew at that point whether we would get a trade agreement or not, or walk away, fail to deliver Brexit on 31st of October, and almost certainly see the government collapse. At that point, we would have seen, at best, a second referendum, quite possibly Brexit taken off the agenda for good, and who knows what consequences in our domestic politics. Against that background, we decided the lesser risk was to push the deal through and trust that we could sort out the necessary detail with the EU later. As it turned out, as we all know, we had to go through an election to get to that point, but deliver it we did, and Brexit finally happened. So my conclusion on the back of all that is that this protocol is the only realistic deal available, given our unsatisfactory starting point in July 2019. I don't believe Brexit would have happened if we'd not taken it, and therefore it's overwhelmingly likely, I think, we would still be in the EU now. And I think the consequences of that, both for our political system and for any influence we had in the EU afterwards, would have been highly damaging. I hear some people say we could have reopened the deal after winning the election and improved it. Frankly, I think they're kidding themselves. We won the election with the oven-ready deal that got Brexit done, and it did. I don't think there was any market, having won the election, for saying either we were leaving without a deal after all, or for delaying exit day, where we did another negotiation on the Northern Ireland Protocol. My personal view of where we got to at this point was that the deal would probably last until the first consent vote in 2024, if we got a free trade agreement, which would reduce the pressure on it. I expected we would do so much domestic reform and change within Great Britain between 2020 and 24 that it would be self-evidently attractive to Northern Ireland opinion to end the protocol and put some more normalised arrangements in place. I also thought that once we left, the atmosphere between us and the EU would change. I also thought it would become much less fraught and tense as we put the bad days behind us, and therefore we'd be able to find ways of implementing the protocol in practice, which kept it workable and ensured that it remained compatible with the Belfast Agreement. Obviously, things didn't turn out like that. And here I turn to the second theme of my speech. Why did it all go wrong? So I don't want to go through the detail of what happened in 2020 while we're in the transition period, not least because my own focus at the time was on the mammoth task of delivering what became the TCA, rather than on the implementing provisions of the protocol through the Joint Committee. There, the withdrawal agreement provisions required a minister to be in charge, and the task was accordingly given to Michael Gove. But I do want to draw out a few key points. Early in 2020, it became clear really quite quickly that the EU had not absorbed either that we genuinely wanted a Canada-style free trade agreement rather than a high alignment version, or that we were determined on leaving the transition period at the end of 2020. I don't think they really realised we were serious on either point until the deadline to extend the transition had passed in June. As a result, the first half of the year, both in my negotiation and in Michael Gove's, was largely shadow boxing. The time to work through the detail, therefore, got squeezed accordingly. And of course, the COVID situation made the practicalities even more difficult to manage. Second, once the EU did realise this, we saw the Northern Ireland Protocol start to be weaponised in the talks, not to shape the agreement, but to try to take away our no-deal option. They wanted to present us with a situation whereby, if there was no deal, the protocol's provisions for full third country tariffs on goods moving to Northern Ireland would apply, and the at-risk provisions would never be worked out reasonably. We faced various threats in the talks that Northern Ireland would be, quote, cut off, and were even told, as we said at the time, that we would, quote, not be able to move 1 kilo of butter from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. That is, that agri-food rules and standards might be used to ban some movements altogether. So that is, third point, the background to the notwithstanding clauses in the UK Internal Market Bill that was leaked by our internal opponents in late August that year. We acknowledged that these clauses would, if they were used, breach the provisions of the protocol, but we felt this was a necessary evil to ensure that we had the powers to regularise the UK's domestic law arrangements in all circumstances, to make clear that we would never allow tariffs within the UK, and to underline that the EU had to take seriously a possible no-deal outcome in the FTA talks. So these provisions understandably caused fury on the EU side, though they were always very careful not to let their outrage get in the way of the FTA talks, and rightly so, and less understandably caused outrage amongst those UK parliamentarians who prioritised the EU relationship over the unity of this country. In the end, we did enough to get us to where we wanted to get to. The Canada-style, fully zero tariff agreement, which removed us from any kind of EU jurisdiction while respecting reasonable, fair competition concerns. This, the removal of tariffs, meant we were able to drop the notwithstanding clauses from the UKIM bill in its final version. Though I've got to say, I must admit, that if I'd known then what I know now, I would have argued for them to be maintained in place, uncommenced, but capable of being reactivated if we needed them. Once again, therefore, we'd got to a point where we believed and we hoped that normal service would be resumed with the EU. We knew the protocol and other aspects of the withdrawal agreement would be tricky, but we believed that the Trader Support Service, removing most day-to-day burdens of form filling, coupled with, as we hoped, a more constructive EU relationship more broadly, would make the situation manageable. And for a brief period, it seemed so. During January 2021, it seemed that the protocol could be made to work. Its provisions came into force, and although there were some shortages and difficulties, they disappeared relatively quickly, were arguably no worse than those in the rest of the UK. DUP opinion said for the time being there was, quote, a gateway of opportunity, but pointed forward to the 2024 consent vote, when Northern Ireland could vote for the protocol to disappear. Unfortunately, that came to an end quickly on the 29th of January last year, with the EU's ham-fisted triggering of Article 16. We've been told repeatedly, incorrectly but repeatedly, over the last 5 years, that it was impossible to bring into play any new processes at the land border. We've been told there could be no new restrictions on north-south movements. That's why we had the protocol. Then the EU turned around and said, in pandemic conditions, let's not forget they were already extremely fraught, just hours after President Macron had denounced the AZ vaccine as quasi-ineffective. The EU said that it proposed to ban exports of vaccines across the land border into Northern Ireland. The passage of time has dimmed memories, I think, of just how extraordinary this proposal was. The EU's rapid retreat from it showed it realised this, but unfortunately the damage was done. The whole moral basis for the protocol had been destroyed in the eyes of unionism. This event showed that the EU's interest came first, whatever the protocol said. And the situation has never recovered. Unionist consent has been destroyed, unionist politics has gone haywire, and it's clear the protocol is never going to be operable as envisaged. Unfortunately, slightly in passing, I don't think we got our response to this EU action quite right either. By ourselves joining the insistence that the whole regulation should be withdrawn, something which was obviously going to happen anyway, we legitimised a return to the status quo ante. But unfortunately, that status quo had, by the EU's action, become untenable, and we were left with the responsibility of managing it. I did argue internally we shouldn't let our outrage overwhelm our interests, but it didn't come out like that. I think it would have been better to point out at that moment that the EU's vaccine proposal would have used a mechanism very much like those we had proposed for customs in autumn 2019, but been told were impossible. We should have said, fine, you, EU, have set a very low bar for the use of Article 16. We note that. You've shown that it is, in fact, possible to control goods going across the land border. So we will allow UK standard goods to circulate in Northern Ireland and put in place arrangements to stop them getting into the single market. I think if we'd said that, we would have had the moral high ground in acting and in circumstances where a challenge would have been very difficult. It was a huge opportunity for us. We didn't take it. And as a consequence, we found ourselves in the only possible alternative position and have been in that position since then. That is, to keep saying that the protocol was not workable, but without being able to effectively point the finger at the EU for making it so. And what subsequently has happened was therefore inevitable. We faced a storm of criticism as we first tried to put in place mitigations and then proposed changes to the protocol. Our opponents rightly sensed we were on weak ground and could be made to suffer politically for it. Indeed, the EU took the opportunity to double down by responding to our low-key extension of the grace periods in areas of vital national interest, such as pet passports and non-commercial parcels, by immediately beginning infraction proceedings ending in the Court of Justice. Through all this, the pressure has been put upon us. The EU has been able to refuse any renegotiation of the protocol while making minor concessions to keep the upper hand. It is us that have now been in the position of having to justify any use of Article 16 while facing very serious counter-threats from our friends and allies in the EU if we dare to. So be it. We are where we are. We have to face the fact that we're in a very serious situation. It's pretty clear, and I think serious commentators agree, that the Belfast Good Friday Agreement is on life support. It's difficult to see the results of next week's elections doing very much to help. To state the obvious, this matters because, as I said at the start of these remarks, the purpose of the protocol is to protect and support the Belfast Agreement. That was the understood objective of the negotiators on both sides. That's why that point is explicit in the text, precisely to avoid any assumption that the later treaty supersedes the earlier one, but rather to make clear that it exists to support it. At the moment, the protocol is doing the reverse of what it's supposed to do. The strains it's causing are actively damaging the Belfast Agreement. It's therefore surely obvious, indeed I think it's an inescapable logical conclusion, that the protocol can't be operated as it stands. It has to be renegotiated or removed. The only question is how we get to that point. That decision is obviously now for the government. I'll set out my view in a moment, but first I've got two prior comments. The first comment's to unionism and unionist voters in Northern Ireland. Unionism is, of course, fragmented and has its own political issues to work through. That's obviously for unionist parties to sort out and not for me. What does worry me a little, though, is that some unionists seem to be giving in to the temptation of accusing HMG of bad faith, allegedly for showing no regard to the interests of Northern Ireland in agreeing the protocol in the first place and then of being reluctant to act to do anything about it. I don't think it's a fair criticism, substantively, as I've tried to show. Northern Ireland has not been left behind in the EU, as some say. In most respects of national life, Northern Ireland's fully part of the UK, operates to EU rules. Even in the narrower trade area, trade in services, 70% of the economy is governed by UK, not EU rules. The union exists and is meaningful. So I don't think it is sensible for unionism to be tempted by going down this road. Whatever the pressures on the government, this is a very unionist government. I know the Prime Minister has had to go through agonies over some of the tough decisions he's had to take on this. If all he gets back is criticism, then it makes it much harder to work up political support to deal with the consequences. I think unionist criticism is best directed at the EU and the Commission, who put us in this position in the first place. Some unionists also give the impression of believing, I think there was a pre-protocol world where Northern Ireland was treated exactly the same as any other part of the UK and where political nationalism did not exist. And once again, I don't think it makes sense to start advocating this vision. To quote Lord Bew, who's here now in Parliament earlier this month, and I quote, "It's very important not to fall guilty of a belief in the project of high unionism," close quotes. However the protocol is amended or replaced, the successor arrangements will need to respect the interests of nationalism and the need to keep up north-south contacts as well as east-west ones. In that sense, I've often said, I said at the start, we will always need special arrangements with the EU to deal with Northern Ireland. The important thing is to get them right, not pretend that they aren't needed. My second preliminary comment is on Ireland. Of course, I don't have any say or influence over how Ireland defines its interests. However, the same is true of Irish observers on the UK, and it doesn't seem to stop them offering advice. So I feel it's fine for me to do the same. I look, for example, at the egregious and in some respects really quite disgraceful, I think, article by Bobby McDonough in the Irish Times on Monday on this situation. So I will do the same. The reality is that at most of the crucial moments of the last 5 years, Ireland has chosen to throw its weight behind EU interests and to prioritise protecting the single market instead of working collaboratively with us to find solutions that can work in Northern Ireland. I do understand why it's done that. Ireland has to stand up for its interests. It fears being cut off from the single market itself, and it recognises it must maintain influence in the EU. I hope Ireland feels it's got good value from the EU for acting like this. It doesn't look 100% clear to me that it always does, and certainly its negotiating capital on this subject seems close to exhausted. We should ourselves, of course, continue to try to work constructively with Ireland bilaterally, but I would like to see Ireland acting in the same spirit, not disrupting the balance in Northern Ireland by constantly using vague and destabilising language about tectonic shifts in the north, or by talking up the supposed all-Ireland economy. At a more prosaic level, to take just one example, I would like to see Ireland operating the common travel area, which, let's not forget, gives Irish citizens virtually all the rights of British citizens, operating it fully, reciprocally, consistently, not only when it suits it. Cooperation takes two. Sometimes it means taking tough decisions in the wider interests, and I hope we'll see some of that realism from the Irish government in the months to come. Now, looking forward, I've got 4 final comments about the current situation. First, we've surely learned from the last few years that we cannot rely on the help of the EU in Northern Ireland. I do not think, to be clear, the EU are operating in bad faith. I do believe they see their own interests as coming first, and that's perfectly reasonable. We should do the same. We have every right to do so. We are the government of the whole of the UK, including Northern Ireland, responsible for the security and prosperity of all its people. Second, the international context has changed hugely. The UK, the EU and its member states are working together closely in Ukraine behind common objectives. The UK's relationship with Poland, the Balts, other Central Europeans has become a hugely important element in managing this ongoing crisis. It may be that some member states, who in the past would have been content to tuck in behind a Commission France-Germany axis in imposing trade sanctions on the UK for taking action on the protocol, maybe they will no longer be ready to do so. Maybe they'll see doing so as entirely self-defeating, and I think they'd be right if they thought that. Some might even welcome, I speculate, the prospect of a definitive fix, however it came to the seemingly endless problems for UK-EU relations created by the protocol. If so, it would be a welcome return of realism to the EU's collective behaviour and very much in the right spirit for our future relationship, which can be much better if we can deal with this issue. Third, it still remains surprising to me that the EU is dug in so strongly against renegotiating the protocol. Their professed view that the protocol is the only way to protect the Belfast Agreement would be self-evidently incorrect, even if the protocol were not so obviously now undermining that agreement. Renegotiation would still be the best way forward. We, when I was a minister, put forward reasonable and workable compromise proposals, and the Commission have a full legal text from us. Of course, the EU can, if they wish, say what we have, we hold, even though even now, of course, the protocol is not being fully implemented. But it's not obvious to me, anyway, why it's in their interest to be significantly co-responsible for the destruction of the Belfast Agreement, unless, of course, the EU define their interests differently, as maintaining leverage over the UK, causing us political difficulties, creating incentives to keep us closely aligned with the EU. That would certainly explain observed behaviour, and it's a reason why we cannot wait forever in the hope of improving the protocol by consent. Fourth, finally, if the EU is not willing to work with us to improve the protocol, then I think the government has no choice but to act unilaterally. Personally, I've never had any difficulty with doing that at the right moment, and nor, I believe, has the Prime Minister. One option would be to act in a fairly limited way, to remove the current pressure points, first by using Article 16, perhaps more than once, as new difficulties arise, and to create new facts on the ground, but also by making clear that it was the UK's intention to secure a negative consent vote in 2024. There's nothing in the protocol which will prevent us doing this, and it would be unarguably legal in all respects. It may be that the situation can't sustain the current tensions over so long a period. If that were to be the government's judgment, and I have no knowledge of this, I think it would be entirely reasonable, in my view, for the government to act unilaterally to override key elements of the protocol in domestic law. In so doing, it would be safeguarding its higher obligation to the Belfast Agreement. I personally do not believe that acting against the protocol should raise or need raise any issues of wider UK compliance with international law. On the wider issues, our track record speaks for itself. The UK is one of the most outspoken advocates of an international system based on agreed rules. In any case, in this context, it's worth recalling the comments by the then Brexit Secretary of State Steve Barclay in Parliament on 12th of March 2019, relaying the government's legal view, which I don't think has changed, that, and I quote, if the objectives of the protocol were no longer being proportionately served by its provisions, because, for example, it was no longer protecting the 1998 agreement in all its dimensions, it could be argued there have been an unforeseen and fundamental change of circumstances affecting the essential basis of the treaty on which the UK's consent had been given. Article 62 of the Vienna Convention permits the termination of a treaty in such circumstances. I think these comments are still highly relevant. In any case, whether you agree with them or not, it's obvious to me the protocol is different. There is almost no other international treaty like the withdrawal agreement and this protocol. The UK was not a fully sovereign power when we negotiated it. The detail of the protocol's provisions was imposed under duress because we had no walk-away option. It makes huge intrusions on UK domestic policy making, which can only be justifiable in circumstances of consensual collaborative arrangements between the two treaty signatories, circumstances which clearly do not exist. Moreover, the protocol is not a permanent feature of our relationship. It is explicitly temporary. It includes a provision for its own replacement. It was agreed under Article 50, which at least in theory, as I understand it, can't be used for permanent arrangements about the future. And highly unusually, probably unprecedentedly actually, in an international treaty, it can be voted out of existence by a legislature in one of the parties. For all these reasons, the protocol is special. If the government has to act against it, then in my view it would be entirely wrong, totally unwarranted, to draw any conclusions about the government's or the UK's wider attitude to international law. If the government does take such action, it will of course require domestic legislation and a sense of purpose and determination to deliver it that has not always been present on other issues in recent months. The government will need to rally its supporters in Parliament. I hope that parliamentarians in our party, but also in the Labour opposition, would in those circumstances be ready to look through the inevitable sound and fury and keep in mind the importance of protecting the union on which this United Kingdom depends. The best of both our major political parties have always stood for this, and I hope they will again. Let me conclude. Our relations with the EU cannot endlessly be bound up with Northern Ireland. The inability to reach a durable protocol settlement means that a huge, indeed, I think an unbearable amount of weight has been put on Northern Ireland's fragile politics as a result. Those politics may now be reaching breaking point, and they are making the current arrangements unworkable. It's time to put our own interests first, the integrity of the UK first, the British people first, and I hope the government will do so. Thanks.
Step. I'm sure plenty of questions. I'll just get a flavour of who wants. And gentleman there, but on the side, name and organisation. There. Yes.
Hi, Adam Penn from Politics Home. Lord Frost, I understand that late last year when you were still in post, there was a serious conversation within government about triggering Article 16. Can you shed some light on why that didn't happen, and who were the voices among your colleagues, cabinet colleagues, who were arguing against it? Was Rishi Sunak one of them? And I was hoping to ask Arlene Foster a question, but if that's not practical, then is that okay? Well, I'll ask it anyway. Arlene, just looking ahead to next week's Assembly election in Northern Ireland, if the DUP, as polls currently suggest, comes second behind Sinn Féin, does the PM have another constitutional crisis on his hands, and how should he react?
Do you want to go, and then Arlene, I'm sure, will when she sums up.
A nice try is my reaction to that. I'm not planning to give any sort of insight into the discussions at the end of last year. We've been considering Article 16 all year last year. I mean, when we put forward our proposals to renegotiate, we said at the time we thought the test for Article 16 was passed, and I believe that's the case. The important thing is that the timing is right, and that if we do use Article 16, if the government does use it, it's done in a legally sound and effective way. And last autumn there was a lot else going on, notably another possible descent into lockdown, and I think all that context got to be taken into account.
Gentleman there in the middle aisle. Name and organisation, please.
Thank you. Jonathan Bullock, former Brexit Party MEP for the East Midlands. In hindsight, Lord Frost, do you not think that a no-deal deal would have been a better option, not least because if it would have been frustrated in Parliament, it could have been put to the British people in a general election, because as we saw, a majority of the British people wanted to get Brexit done, and then you would have had the negotiating room to do it.
So I mean, I feel I've kind of answered that question a bit in the speech, that you know, if we'd been in charge since July 2016, I think we would have ended up a different point. I genuinely believe that, without wanting to sort of pour cold water on what the team did achieve in extraordinary, difficult circumstances. I don't think we had a walk-away option, really, for political reasons and parliamentary reasons by mid-2019. I'm not convinced after the trauma of the previous 3 years that it would have been an easy sell to the British people. I think the right thing was to do what we tried to do, which was to get the best possible deal and sell that. And you know, those are judgment. People can come to different views about that, but that's the one we came to, and I think I feel comfortable defending it despite some of the difficulties that have followed.
I've just been reminded to also ask anyone who may be listening off-site to put their electronic hands up. I see one question so far. Austin Morgan, barrister. Austin, can you hear me? Austin, can you hear me? Third time lucky?
Yes, Dean, I can hear you.
Good. Just a tad louder. People don't often say that to you, Austin, a tad louder, but if you would be so kind.
Lord Frost, I have a question about Consent 2024, on which you've placed a great deal of weight. Now, the protocol says the vote has to be on a cross-community basis, but the UK issued a declaration at the time of the withdrawal agreement saying it would be a simple majority, and indeed the UK has changed its domestic law. in 2024, there is a serious risk that a simple vote in the Northern Ireland Assembly will be a vote to continue the protocol, not to destroy it. So why did the UK issue a declaration trying to shift away from a cross-community vote to a simple majority vote?
So both the protocol and the terms of the declaration were obviously all part of the negotiation with Ireland and the Commission, even though they are different legal form, they have to be read together. And I think the simple answer to your question, as it is to so many other of these, is that in different circumstances we would have agreed something different, but this was the best arrangement that we could do at the time under the pressures that we faced. And it is imperfect, though I think legally sound. It offers a good prospect, I think, of a campaign against the protocol if this government and unionism and others wish to do it between now and 2024. It doesn't determine the outcome, obviously. It depends on the vote. But I think it allows scope to make that consent meaningful and for those who care about it to shape it.
Just trying to get a flavour. A lot of people looking for questions. Gentleman in the aisle there had his hand up. Name and organisation, please.
Dennis Staunton from the Irish Times. You spoke about this, the way in which the war in Ukraine has brought Britain closer together with some countries in Central and Eastern Europe. And I'm wondering if how confident you are that those, that closeness will be reflected in some kind of intervention if it were to come to some talk of retaliation against Britain for actions on the protocol. And do you see an alliance like this being useful to Britain in any other policy areas where the European Union is concerned?
So my speech is a mix of informed comment and speculation, I suppose. It's not a firm view, and obviously I can't speak for those governments. But it certainly seems like obvious to me that a trade war between the EU and the UK is not the most sensible way of proceeding at the moment, and it doesn't have to happen. It's not a condition that inevitably follows Article 16 or other unilateral action. It's something the EU would choose to do, and I think that choice would be a pretty serious one at the moment if you went down that road. I do think, I mentioned the Balts and the Poles and other Central Eastern Europeans in the speech. I don't think it is only about them. I think I gave a speech in Zurich a couple of months ago where I said, as I've said on many occasions actually, UK and EU relations can be much, much better, but we do need to solve the protocol problem. And I think what we're seeing on Ukraine is the potentiality of good relations, but we still need to solve this problem. The point of Brexit is not to have bad relations with the EU, it is to have different and good relations with the EU, but this stone in the shoe remains.
Lady there, name and organisation, please. Microphone coming.
Thank you very much, Lord Frost, and thank you for your honesty.
Just say your name.
Baroness Hoey. Thank you for your honesty. As a strong Brexiteer, I understand how you got there. But what I want to ask, and Austin Morgan raised something, it's very, very important, the cross-community consent principle, which was changed. And I wonder if in reflection you think perhaps that in all these negotiations we gave far too much weight to the Irish government and their views on some of these issues. And can I just finally say, do you think that actually the protocol issue will ever be settled, even if there have to be special arrangements, we understand that, while Northern Ireland still would stay constitutionally in a situation where domestic law would be overruled by European Union law? In other words, we have to get rid of Article 7 of the withdrawal agreement.
I can't see it now. Maybe there were circumstances. I believed there were circumstances where this could be manageable because of the consent arrangements. But it obviously, would have required a degree of how to put it, sort of a prudence and delicate handling from the EU about how it legislated that just has not been the case. And I think given that experience, I don't see how it can work. So a durable settlement's got to deal with that problem, in my view. I think, your question about Ireland, I think is difficult to answer because, so much of the negotiation had happened before we took over, and then, as I've said, the circumstances were very fraught. So I think, Ireland's interests in this are obviously very significant and important and deserve to be taken into account. That's part of the spirit of these things. Whether we found the right balance at the end, I'm not sure really, but I think it's important not to see the protocol as a definitive thing that was created at a particular moment in time and can never change. If you see it as something that can evolve as circumstances evolve, we're in a different sort of world, and I think that's what we should try and do.
I see another request online. James Crisp, Europe editor of The Telegraph. James, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
A little louder, please, for the audience here.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
Super. Well, thank you for the question. Lord Frost, you gave an interview in which you gave yourself an A- for your Brexit deal, and the government a B+ on the capitalisation on Brexit benefits. I'd like to ask what grade you would give Liz Truss since she's taken over from you as Brexit negotiator, please.
I don't think it's for. I think it's only fair to mark my own homework, not others, to be honest. But I would say I think Liz, as I think we can all see, has done a brilliant job at taking over. I think, on the protocol issue, I think she has found what I found, that, kind of whether the words from the UK are warm or not warm, and whatever our posture, EU interests remain as they are. And she's made, I think, no more progress really than we made last year in the negotiation. I'm in no way surprised by that. More broadly, I think she's doing an excellent job, and is a big part of the reason why we're making such an effective contribution in Ukraine as a country.
Because time limited, I just see two people have been waiting patiently in front. If we can take questions in future and brace of questions. Name and organisation, please.
Stefanie Bolzen, I'm the London editor for German Die Welt. The German government coalition treaty from last December says that the Northern Ireland Protocol has to be implemented. So do you expect the German government to break up its own coalition paper?
Lady next. Name and organisation, please.
Hello, I'm Deborah Bonetti, Italian journalist and director of the Foreign Press Association. We've had Lord Frost with us a few times. I wanted to ask you, a lot of hindsight today, and thank you for being so clear. I wanted to ask you if there's anything in particular that you're particularly proud of in this protocol, because it seems it was negotiated under duress, it's imperfect, it's a bit of a mess. Anything you're proud of, and would you agree that the EU outmaneuvered you?
Gosh, quite a few questions there. The German coalition agreement, I thought it was quite unusual in the first place, to be honest, for the German coalition agreement to be commenting on this subject. And I don't really mind. German domestic policy's got to deal with the consequences of this in its own way. I think we should be focused on finding the right solution for the protocol and for Ireland and for Northern Ireland, and I'm sure the German coalition will be able to accommodate itself to whatever the outcome of that is, if it's still in being by then. What am I proud of? I'm proud of the fact that we found a situation that seemed to be utter chaos and unmanageable, and somehow pulled something out of that delivered on the vote of the British people. And it seemed impossible at the time. We were constantly told, you can't remove the backstop, the EU will never agree to this, it's impossible, you just have to sort of reconcile yourself to it. And I'm proud of the fact that the Prime Minister, me, the small team around us, got this done when lots of people said it couldn't be done. And that's the place in history, I think, for that government is getting this done and changing history. Did they outmaneuver me? I think, I mean, I don't think anybody can look back at this whole period of negotiation and think that, I mean, I go right back to June 2016, not just my bit of it, and think that that is the finest hour of UK diplomacy. I don't think it was. I think we conceded, as I noted in the policy exchange paper that we produced last year, I think a lot of things got conceded too early in circumstances where we didn't need to concede them, and we therefore, made a rod for our own back by the end. That's obvious. I think we did much better in 2020, and it's a much better agreement, and it will last, I'm confident.
Time for one last clutch of questions. I see there's who else on, so I'm going to have to engage in. Lady there, final question. We'll bring the name and organisation, please.
Ellen Milligan with Bloomberg. I wanted to ask about the election next week. How do you think that will impact negotiations between the EU and the UK in the future of the protocol? And if Sinn Féin do become the largest party, which is looking like in the polls, do you think the government should use that as leverage in the negotiations going forward?
So, I mean, I'll be interested in what Arlene has to say actually on the domestic politics. I don't really regard it as my, something I can usefully say any more on at the moment than what I've already said. I think it is, however, it's entirely plausible that after the elections we'll have a political situation in Northern Ireland that is even more difficult than the one we've had in previous months. And a lot of that is clearly the outworking of things that began with the entry into force of the protocol. So I don't think it's a question of using it as leverage, it's just the reality. And in the end, the British government's got to take responsibility for that reality and do something about it. And I hope it does.
Thank you. Just to say, we do have more copies of the Northern Ireland Protocol, The Origins of the Current Crisis, by Roderick Crawford, with a forward by Lord Frost. We're producing much more in this area and sort of keeping that chronology up to date, and we'll keep you informed of that. But say if you do want copies, we do have them here. Arlene, thank you for coming over today from Fermanagh. Always welcome. You win I think you're Victor Ludorum for the distance travelled, but you've been a great friend to us through the years, and very much look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean. That Arlene from Fermanagh moniker is going to stick, I feel. First of all, I do want to thank Policy Exchange for hosting what is a very significant intervention, I have to say, by Lord Frost today. And congratulations on your new premises, Dean. Very, very nice indeed. Also want to thank David, of course, for putting so much time, effort and interest into his comments today. A detailed retelling of what happened after the current Prime Minister came into office, and also what should happen now, because I think that's a critical point in where we are. And as someone who was involved with it all, I do recognise a lot of the narrative from David in terms of what happened after July 2019. But I did want to go back in my brief comments a little bit further, because some of us were pointing out the direction of travel of the European Union and the Irish government, particularly from December 2017 onwards. And I wanted to quote from one of my former colleagues in a speech in the House of Commons on the withdrawal agreement as it was then. On the 9th of January 2019, Gavin Robinson, MP for Belfast East, referred to the Belfast Agreement and the fact that many in the House of Commons had said that the agreement contains a commitment to an open border in Ireland. And to quote Gavin then, "It simply does not. I will give way to any member of Parliament who wants to explain to me where that provision is in the Belfast Agreement. It is not there. It is based on mutual respect, interconnected cooperation and better relationships between peoples of Northern Ireland and the people of the Republic of Ireland." And to come to Austin Morgan's point about the Belfast Agreement and the consent issue in the Belfast Agreement, the fundamental issue is that a lot of people in Europe, and regrettably a lot of people in our own government, did not understand the Belfast Agreement or what it actually contained. And I do hope that people do go and read. The Belfast Agreement's not actually very long. People should go and have a read of the agreement, but it is fundamentally based on cross-community consent, so that there is that balance in Northern Ireland between the communities, that people are content with the arrangements. And clearly, that nature of being content is not there at the present. And Prime Minister May did make a number of very early errors in relation to the negotiations with the European Union. She believed political aspirations as opposed to what was actually the reality of the situation in Northern Ireland, and indeed the Belfast Agreement's reality. And she also wrongly accepted the premise that the UK government had to solve the issue of the border question without knowing what the trading relationship was going to be. In other words, provide an answer when you don't know what the question is, which was an incredible situation that the government allowed themselves to get into. And we had the sequencing of negotiations that you had to solve the border question before you could move on. And that should never have been accepted. And Gavin Robinson finished his commentary by saying that we in the DUP, as it was then, wanted very much to find a workable solution. But unfortunately, that wasn't to be the case, and David has set that out. Something else that David has reflected on today is around the Irish government and their attitude to the negotiations, particularly after June of 2017, to argue that there couldn't be any vestige of a border on the island of Ireland, when of course the basis of the Belfast Agreement is the consent of the people of Northern Ireland, and the consent of the people of Northern Ireland as to whether they want to remain within the United Kingdom is very, very clear. So there is a border on the island of Ireland. It's just how we deal with the relationships on the island of Ireland, and indeed east-west as well. After the result of the European Union referendum in 2016, there was an understanding between myself and the then Taoiseach Enda Kenny that we would work together to find a way forward which didn't damage Northern Ireland and wouldn't have an impact on relationships on the island of Ireland, which were very good, I have to say, at that particular time. But just before Enda left and the new administration took hold, things changed, and those below the radar contacts between officials ceased to happen. I regret that, because I think there was a good understanding between the officials and our own officials at that time. But the focus of the new Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, and his very muscular Foreign Secretary, Simon Coveney, was not really on how to get a Brexit done which recognised the issues in Northern Ireland as part of the United Kingdom, but more as to how they could frustrate the outworkings of the democratic vote that was taken in the United Kingdom, trying to stop Brexit. And the second best, if they couldn't do that, would be to try and separate Northern Ireland out from the rest of the United Kingdom. And of course, we know the difficulties that have happened ever since the protocol has been operational. I think that was a very foolish, reckless thing to do, actually, with what was happening in Northern Ireland and the relationships that had been built up over a number of years, north-south and east-west. And I do hope that the regression in the state of relationships between the communities in Northern Ireland and indeed north-south and east-west will be able to be rebuilt again. But to do that, there has to be an understanding and an acceptance from the Irish establishment that the protocol has to go and it needs to be renegotiated. And looking forward, David mentioned that he doesn't think the EU are going to act, and therefore it is left then to our own government to deal with the protocol in a substantial and meaningful way. Because, as David has absolutely said spot on, the protocol was only ever meant to be temporary. And that has been reaffirmed by a case which Baroness Hoya and I are involved in the Court of Appeal, when they said very clearly that if you look at the text and the way in which it is put together, it was only ever meant to be temporary. So let's be honest about that and try and find a new way forward. Dean, as I say, in Northern Ireland, often time is money, and it very much is money in terms of our economy and the growth of that economy in terms of the protocol. But it's not only money. It's also about having devolution again. I want to finish on this because people have asked questions about what's happening in Northern Ireland and the fact that we're having elections next week. I think the protocol, and because of the fact that it is still there and still causing damage, reducing choice, increasing cost for people in Northern Ireland, means that we will not see a resumption of the executive immediately, but you will see talks. And talks will happen regardless of who the largest party is. All I will say is, in that respect, I think there are polls and then there's elections, and we should all wait for election day. Thank you very much.